The auditorium buzzed with tension as 17-year-old Sophia Mikhailov hovered over the chessboard, her fingers poised above her queen. Around her, the crowd held its breath. This was the final move of the regional championship, and her opponent, the reigning titleholder from a rival school, had just made a fatal blunder. With a steady hand, she slid her rook across the board. "Checkmate," she declared, her voice calm but her heart pounding. The room erupted in applause. Her coach, Mr. Hendricks, clapped her on the back, his face alight with pride. "That's my star," he boomed, shaking hands with the college scouts who had come specifically to watch her play. One of them, a representative from Columbia University, handed her a business card with a smile. "We'll be in touch," he said, and Sophia allowed herself a rare, hopeful grin. This was her ticket out of her small town, away from the suffocating expectations of her strict, immigrant parents. But as she stepped off the stage, a wave of nausea hit her so violently that she barely made it to the bathroom in time. She gripped the sink, staring at her pale reflection in the mirror. This wasn't just tournament nerves. It had been weeks of dizziness, of discreetly skipping meals to avoid vomiting, of loosening the waistband of her skirt when no one was looking. The whispers had already started. "Did you see how much weight she's gained?" But she brushed them off, blaming stress, bloating, anything but the terrifying truth she couldn't bring herself to face. That night, locked in her bedroom, she finally worked up the courage to take the pregnancy test she'd hidden under her mattress. The 2 pink lines appeared instantly. Her stomach dropped. No, this couldn't be happening. Not now, not when she was so close to everything she'd worked for. Panic clawed at her throat as she calculated the timeline. It must have been that one reckless night with Jason after prom, the night she'd convinced herself didn't matter because she'd never see him again after graduation. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind racing. What would her parents say? Her father, a stern man who valued reputation above all, had once disowned her older brother for dropping out of college. Her mother, though kinder, would never defy him. And Mr. Hendricks? He'd built his entire coaching career around her success, calling her his legacy. She could already hear his disgusted sigh. You threw it all away for some boy. The scholarship, the future, the respect. All of it would vanish the second anyone found out. For weeks, she buried the truth, wearing baggy sweaters and blaming her absences on migraines. But the lies grew heavier. At practice, her focus wavered. She lost a casual match to a freshman, and Mr. Hendricks's smile turned to a scowl. "What's wrong with you?" he snapped. "You're playing like you don't even care anymore." She forced an apology, but her hands trembled. Then came the day her mother cornered her in the kitchen. "Sophia," she said quietly, eyeing her daughter's untouched plate, "are you sick?" Sophia's pulse spiked. "Just tired," she mumbled, but her mother's gaze dropped to her waist, and the unspoken question hung between them like a guillotine. That night, her father called her into his study. "If you embarrass this family," he said coldly, "you're on your own." She fled to her room, choking back tears. The breaking point came at the state qualifiers. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Sophia clenched her fists under the table, willing herself to focus, but a sharp pain ripped through her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over. The crowd murmured as her opponent frowned. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded weakly, but sweat beaded on her forehead. Then, a wet warmth flooded her chair. Horror dawned as she realized. Her water had broken. The room spun. No, not here. She staggered to her feet, but her legs gave out. As she collapsed, the last thing she heard was the screams of her classmates, the flash of phones recording her humiliation, and Mr. Hendricks's voice cutting through the chaos. "What have you done?" The world came back to Sophia in jagged fragments, the sterile smell of antiseptic, the 2 bright fluorescent lights of the school nurse's office, and the distant, echoing laughter of her classmates. Her body ached, her uniform damp with sweat and worse, and the contractions came in relentless waves, each one a fresh reminder of how spectacularly her life had unraveled in mere minutes. Outside the door, voices jeered. "Did you see her face? She's totally freaking out." A phone camera flashed through the small window, and Sophia turned away, humiliation burning her cheeks. The nurse, Ms. Alvarez, had taken one look at her and called an ambulance, but even her professional detachment couldn't mask her pity. "Breathe, sweetheart," she murmured, pressing a cold cloth to Sophia's forehead, but the kindness only made the tears come harder. Then the door slammed open, and Mr. Hendricks stormed in, his face purple with rage. "You lied to me," he spat, towering over her cot. "All this time, you were." He gestured wildly at her swollen belly, as if the word was too vile to say. "That scholarship? Gone. Columbia won't touch this mess. You threw it all away for what? A mistake." Sophia flinched, but before she could speak, another contraction seized her, her gasp of pain cutting through his tirade. Disgust flickered across his face. "I should have known you'd crack under pressure," he muttered, turning for the door. "Don't bother coming back to the team." The dismissal hit like a physical blow, but worse was the silence that followed, the sound of her future shattering. Then came the betrayal that carved the deepest wound. "Lena," Sophia choked out when she spotted her best friend hovering in the hallway, her face pale. For a wild, hopeful second, she thought Lena would rush to her side like she had 1,000 times before, when Sophia's father had yelled, when she'd lost her first tournament, when the stress had felt unbearable. But Lena didn't move. "I can't," she whispered, eyes darting to the crowd of students filming on their phones. "My parents would kill me if I got mixed up in this. You know how they are." Sophia's stomach twisted. She did know. Lena's family was even stricter than hers, her reputation meticulously curated. "Please," Sophia begged, but Lena backed away, mouthing, "I'm sorry," before vanishing into the sea of gawking faces. Alone, Sophia curled into herself, the contractions coming faster now, each one a cruel mockery of the life growing inside her while hers fell apart. "I have nowhere to go," she sobbed into the thin pillow, the words raw and broken. Her parents would disown her. The school would expel her. The baby's father, Jason, who'd ghosted her after prom, hadn't even answered her texts. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The ambulance seemed to take forever. Ms. Alvarez fretted over her, but even her kindness felt distant, procedural. Then, just as the pain crested into something unbearable, the door creaked open again. Sophia braced for more ridicule, but instead, a gruff voice snapped. "All right, show's over. Get lost." It was the school janitor, Mr. Rivera, a burly man in his 50s with a permanent scowl and hands rough from decades of work. He shooed away the lingering students with a glare before turning to her. For a long moment, he just studied her, the tear-streaked face, the shaking hands clutching her belly. Then, to her shock, he pulled up a chair and sat. "Breathe through it," he instructed, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Like this." He demonstrated, inhaling deeply and instinctively. She mimicked him. The pain dulled, just slightly. "You're gonna be okay," he said, and it wasn't empty reassurance. It was a fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who'd seen worse. When Sophia whimpered about her parents, he shook his head. "I was 16 when my girlfriend got pregnant," he said bluntly. "Everyone said I'd end up a deadbeat. But my boy, he's a doctor now." Sophia stared at him, stunned. Mr. Rivera, the man who'd mopped these halls for years, who the kids joked was too grumpy to have a life, had been her once. "Life don't end here," he said, pressing a calloused hand over hers. "It just changes." Outside, the ambulance sirens wailed, but for the first time since she'd collapsed, Sophia felt a flicker of something like hope. The ambulance ride was a blur of pain and panic, but Mr. Rivera's words echoed in Sophia's mind like a lifeline. Life don't end here. When they wheeled her into the hospital, she clung to that mantra, even as nurses barked orders and the contractions ripped through her like fire. But then, as if the universe had one more cruel joke to play, she heard a familiar voice in the hallway. "Oh my God, is that her?" Sophia turned her head just enough to see Aisling Gwynn, the reigning chess bully of Jefferson High, gaping at her from the doorway, phone already raised. "Hey," Schley had been her nemesis for years, the one who'd mocked her immigrant parents' accents, who'd spread rumors that Sophia only won tournaments because she slept with the judges. Now, Ashley's fingers flew over her screen, no doubt uploading Sophia's most vulnerable moment to the world. A fresh wave of despair crashed over her, but then something unexpected happened. Ashley froze, her eyes locking onto Sophia's face, not with glee, but with something like recognition. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other, Sophia's pain laid bare, Ashley's smirk fading. Then, without a word, Ashley lowered her phone. "Wait," she muttered to the giggling friend beside her. "We shouldn't." Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then, decisively, she deleted the video. Sophia barely had time to process it before another contraction stole her breath, but the shock of that small mercy carried her through the next agonizing hours. When she woke hours later, groggy and aching, the first thing she saw was a tiny bundle in the bassinet beside her, her daughter, with a shock of dark hair and perfect, wrinkled fingers. The reality of it all threatened to drown her. "I'm someone's mother now." But before the panic could take root, the curtain around her bed rustled. Ashley stood there, shifting awkwardly, her usual bravado replaced by something hesitant. "Hey," she said, voice uncharacteristically quiet. I took down the posts. The ones from school, too." Sophia could only stare, waiting for the punchline. Ashley sighed. "Look, I'm not gonna pretend I like you. But what happened back there, it wasn't right." She fidgeted with her jacket sleeve, avoiding Sophia's eyes. "My sister had a baby last year. She's 19. Everyone treated her like trash. Even my parents. I guess I didn't want to be like them." The admission hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Ashley didn't apologize, not really, but she did something better. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a sign-up sheet for a meal train, already half filled with names. "Some of the girls from school," she mumbled. "They wanted to help." Sophia's throat tightened. These were the same people who'd laughed at her hours ago. Now, they'd brought casseroles. By the time Mr. Rivera arrived that evening, Sophia had braced herself for the next battle. Where would she go? Her parents hadn't answered the hospital's calls. But Mr. Rivera wasn't alone. Principal Hayes strode in beside him, her usual stern expression softened by exhaustion. "Mikhailov," she said, cutting straight to the point. "We need to talk about your future." Sophia braced for expulsion, but the principal surprised her. "The school has a housing program for students in crisis," she said. "It's not glamorous, but it's safe. And the daycare center can take infants while you finish your classes." Sophia's breath caught. "Why?" she blurted. Principal Hayes exchanged a glance with Mr. Rivera. "Because I was you once," she said flatly. "Minus the chess trophies. I had a baby at 16, and everyone wrote me off. But someone gave me a chance. Now it's my turn." She slid a contract across the bed tray, a promise of enrollment, contingent on Sophia keeping her grades up. "You're not the first kid to fall down," the principal added, "but you can decide if you stay there." Mr. Rivera squeezed her shoulder, his rough hand warm and steady. "Told you," he murmured. "Things change." The fluorescent lights of the school's 24-hour study room buzzed softly as Sophia hunched over a chessboard, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. Baby Mia slept in a carrier against her chest, her tiny breaths warm against Sophia's collarbone. It was 3 a.m., the only time she could study and practice, sandwiched between diaper changes, pediatrician visits, and the mountain of assignments she was determined to ace. Her fingers trembled as she moved a pawn, her mind foggy with exhaustion. "This is impossible," she thought for the 100th time, blinking back tears of frustration. The other chess team members had moved on without her, their Instagram posts from weekend tournaments salt in the wound. But then Mia stirred, her small hand brushing Sophia's chin, and she remembered Principal Hayes' words. "You're not the first to fall down, but you can decide if you stay there." With a deep breath, she reset the board and started again. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place, Mr. Hendricks. She'd been avoiding the gym where the chess team practiced, unable to face her old coach's disappointment. But one afternoon, as she rushed to daycare before her shift at the school library, she literally collided with him in the hallway. For a long, awful moment, they just stared at each other, the silence punctuated by Mia's happy gurgles from her stroller. Then, to her shock, Mr. Hendricks crouched down, making silly faces at the baby. "She's got your focus," he muttered. When he straightened, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I was wrong, kid," he said, voice rough. "I thought champions never faltered. But true champions." He nodded at Mia. They adapt. That weekend, he showed up at her tiny apartment with a travel chess set and a proposition. "State finals are in 6 weeks. Let's get you ready." The day of the state championship dawned gray and drizzly, matching the anxiety churning in Sophia's stomach. As she stepped into the tournament hall, whispers followed her. "That's the girl who..." But she kept her head high, squeezing Mia's tiny hand where she sat with Mr. Rivera in the front row. The first rounds passed in a blur of calculated moves and stolen glances at her daughter's smiling face. Then came the final match against Daniel Cho, the defending state champion. The room fell silent as they shook hands. Daniel smirked. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'll go easy on you." Rage sharpened her focus. Midway through the game, disaster struck. Mia began to wail, her hungry cries echoing through the hall. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Can someone remove the distraction?" The judge hesitated, but Sophia stood abruptly.
"No."
Her voice carried. "She stays." To everyone's shock, she lifted Mia from Mr. Rivera's arms, cradling her with one hand while moving her queen with the other. The baby quieted instantly, her tiny fingers grasping Sophia's necklace, a gift from her own mother, back when things were simpler. What happened next would become Jefferson High legend. With Mia's weight warm against her chest, Sophia played the game of her life. Her moves were bold, unpredictable, just like motherhood had forced her to be. When she called checkmate, the room erupted. Even Daniel shook her hand with grudging respect. But the real victory came after. When the Columbia scout approached, his earlier skepticism replaced by awe. "That," he said, nodding at Mia now sleeping peacefully in her carrier, "was the most impressive display of concentration I've ever seen." He handed her a new envelope, the scholarship reinstated, with additional funding for childcare. As Sophia hugged Mia close, breathing in her sweet baby scent, she finally understood what Mr. Rivera had meant. Life hadn't ended that day in the school auditorium. It had simply changed course, leading her somewhere stronger, fiercer, and more beautiful than she could have imagined. The graduation gown billowed around Sophia as she adjusted the microphone, her fingers brushing against the tiny chess piece pin on her lapel, a gift from Mr. Rivera. The auditorium was packed, but her eyes found the front row immediately. Mia, now a bright-eyed toddler clapping her chubby hands in Mr. Rivera's lap, Principal Hayes, her usual stern expression softened by pride, and Coach Hendricks, who'd somehow become the one snapping 100 photos like an overexcited parent. Even her own mother sat beside them, a tentative bridge rebuilt through months of shared babysitting and tearful conversations. The crowd quieted as Sophia cleared her throat, but no one expected what came next. 2 years ago, I stood in this very auditorium thinking my life was over, she began, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. I was a chess champion who'd just lost her biggest match, not on the board but in life. Or so I thought. She nodded toward the wings, where Aisling Gwynn, her former tormentor, now stood in a volunteer's t-shirt, helping usher in a group of nervous-looking teen moms from the school's support program. Funny how things change, Sophia continued, smiling as Ashley waved awkwardly at the crowd. The girl who once filmed my lowest moment now spends her Saturdays mentoring others like me. Because here's the secret no one tells you. We all make bad moves. The question is who steps in to help you keep playing. Her gaze landed on Mr. Rivera, who was discreetly wiping his eyes with a worn handkerchief. To the man who mopped up my mess, literally, and then taught me to clean up my life. You were right. Life didn't end that day. It began again. The audience erupted in applause as Mr. Rivera lifted Mia's tiny hand to wave, the little girl giggling at the noise. Sophia waited for the cheers to subside before adding, "And to every person out there who thinks one mistake defines them, look at me. Look at us." She gestured to the diverse group on stage, teen parents in caps and gowns, teachers who'd bent rules to help them, former bullies turned allies. Your worst moment isn't your ending. It's just the move before your comeback. As she stepped down, the crowd rose in a standing ovation, but Sophia only had eyes for Mia, who reached for her with sticky fingers and a cry of "Mama." Cradling her daughter, she finally understood the full circle of it all: the fear, the fall, and the fierce love that had carried her through. Backstage, Ashley handed her a tissue with a wry grin. "Still not sorry I beat you in junior year," she teased, "but you killed that speech." Sophia laughed, pulling her into a one-armed hug. Somewhere in the chaos, Mr. Rivera was already handing his card to a wide-eyed freshman who just confided she was pregnant. Coach Hendricks was arguing with the caterers about gluten-free options for Mia, and Principal Hayes was dryly reminding everyone that this doesn't mean we're lowering academic standards. Life, Sophia thought as she adjusted Mia's tiny graduation-themed onesie, wasn't a straight path to victory. It was a messy, unpredictable game where the real win wasn't never falling. It was having people who helped you stand back up, dust off your knees, and play again.